This week on the WriterCon podcast,
write the kinds of books you like to read.
Welcome to WriterCon, a gathering place for writers to share their knowledge about writing and the writing world. Your hosts are William Bernhardt, best-selling novelist and author of the Red Sneaker books on writing, and Rene Gutteridge, best-selling author of over 30 novels and screenplays.
Hello, writers. All right, first of all, let me explain where we are today. We're recording this episode a little earlier than we usually do because next week, Jesse and I will be on the WriterCon cruise, sailing the Bounty Main and anchors away. And I should never have started singing, but if you've got another sea shanty, just jump in there. I heard you.
I just like to sing the Pirates of the Caribbean theme song every time.
Or
I'm on
that.
the ship, so yeah.
Yo ho. No, I'll stop. So we're recording this now. We're also going to record a podcast episode during the cruise, like on the cruise. I don't know how, but Jesse assures me that it can be done. So that's what we're going to do. So when you're actually listening to this episode, assuming you listen to it the day it's released, because who wants to wait on the WriterCon podcast? Anyway, if you listen to it on that day, we'll be at sea. But the episode released after that will be the one we recorded during the cruise. Perfectly clear, right? All right. Let's talk to our sound engineer, Jesse Ulrich. Jesse, are you looking forward to this cruise?
I am. I'm researching a lot of interesting ways for me to be able to record this live podcast, this podcast on a ship with as little equipment as possible. We might be using my wireless lav microphones that I have. I can figure out how to get to the work. I just don't want to drag
your phone for the video, or what?
No, like the camera part's fine. It's the fact it's like having an XLR cord for each microphone. Like those just end up taking up a lot of space in a bag, and I'm trying to not bring a huge suitcase onto the ship this time. So the Star Trek cruise, we had lots of luggage because we had lots of outfits and whatnot. I'm trying to not do that this time. So we'll see how that goes.
My wife keeps trying to talk me into costuming, and I keep saying, but my bag is so small. You're really blowing my deal. We are driving. I suppose we could technically bring as much luggage as we want, but I think you should. Yeah,
I'm trying to get. We got to fly, and we're buying some bottled water in Galveston, and then getting on the ship.
Then on the ship. Hey, Rene, you're not joining us this time, but you've been on writing cruises before, haven't you?
I have. I actually sold my first novel on a writing cruise, which was really a great way to do it if you're going to sell a novel.
Explain why we have cruises. It works.
Yes, it works. Yeah, it sure did. It was a small group of people, so you got extra time with instructors, and I was able to. It's a great story. I'll have to tell at another time, but. We're
all here.
Well, it's rather long. It includes that I was pregnant, seasick, and desperate in the middle of pitching to this acquisitions editor. I had a whole list of pitches. So this was like a
pity pitch, is what you're saying?
Well, it was a funny story because I had this whole list of pitches, and we got to the end of like 10, and he hated all of them. And he was like, do you have anything else? And I was like, I had thought of a story on the plane there. I pitched it in just about the worst way that one could possibly pitch a story. And he was like, I'd like to see that one.
Oh,
and
wow.
So I ran home, got my pitch together, sent it to him, and the rest is history.
Wow. What's the takeaway there? Never stop talking.
Right.
Keep going until they hear something they like.
Yeah, it was strange. It was strange, but it actually was a good plot, and that's what I pitched was the plot. And So
that, of course, we're ready to sail now, but there'll be another WriterCon cruise next year, everyone. This can happen to you, could happen to you, just like it did Rene. So
absolutely
keep that in the back of your mind. Today, our guest is Alisa Lynn Valdes. About 20 years ago, Alisa released her first novel, which was called The Dirty Girls Social Club. It was a huge breakout success. She's published 12 more books since, and then she took about a 10-year break doing other things. She's going to talk about that in the interview, but now she is back with a new suspense novel called Hollow Beasts, which has just hit the stand. The novel introduces us to a new protagonist, a poet and professor and rookie game warden named Jody Luna. This book sounds so right up my alley. I can't wait to talk about it. But first, the news, right after a brief word from Kevin Tumlinson at Draft to Digital.
Hi, this is Kevin Tumlinson with Draft to Digital. Ebooks are amazing, but there's just something about having your book in print. That's why we built D2D Print. We take care of you with free layout templates and formatting, and we can convert your ebook cover into a full wraparound print cover automatically. Come check out D2D Print and all the cool tools we've built for you. Find out more at drafttodigital.com.
Okay, so most of our stories, actually I think all of our stories this time around, are updates to previous stories we've covered, ongoing stories we'll call it. For instance, last time we were talking about Roald Dahl and how he and others, Ian Fleming, Dr. Seuss, are being edited after they're gone. And we've also talked about the startling rise in book banning in 2022, more than double in 2022. Well, now all of these stories are coming together because someone has found the world's least likely target for book banning, I think, James Patterson. Yes, James Patterson has been banned and he doesn't like it. You know that across the country there have been local and state officials moving to ban certain titles, usually because they tackle racism or sexuality or gender identity, and some people think that's a threat to younger readers, and there have been librarians and teachers who pushed back against these bans. Some have been harassed online, some have been dismissed. I mean, you'd think, okay, it's going to be Catcher in the Rye because somebody's always trying to ban Catcher, or Beloved by Toni Morrison. But no, now best-selling author James Patterson, the highest earning author in America for years running, has been pulled into this fray because school officials in Martin County, Florida, removed his entire young adult series, that's the Maximum Ride series, from its elementary school library. Just in case you don't know, these books feature, it's like kids with superpowers. They fly, they got wings. They're winged human avian hybrids, okay? After he heard about it, Patterson tweeted urging his fans who found, quote, mindless book banning troubling or confusing, end quote, to write Florida Governor, have you heard this name recently? Ron DeSantis. Patterson also said, I'm again quoting, there's nothing in that book that should scare anyone. Kids who are into science and math love it because I talked to scientists for it about whether you can put wings on kids, which is kind of fun, end quote. All right, Rene, setting aside all the hot button issues floating around, what do you think? What's your take on all these school book bannings?
Well, this one really had me scratching my head as well. My kids read this, loved it. In fact, it was yes,
bad
I know.
Mother.
I know. I'm starting to question myself here on the show.
You probably let them read Catcher in the Rye too.
Yeah, yes, and Harry Potter, if you can believe it.
Witchcraft.
Oh no.
Yeah, golly, it just has. I mean, I don't know. What do you say to this? I don't know. I don't know what to say. I'm astonished by a lot of it. As a parent, sure, there are things that I'm looking at going, yeah, I'd really like my kid to not read that. But I think that's an internal discussion within the home. I remember when Harry Potter came out and like everybody was losing their mind on this book. So I did, something so radical. I read it myself before I let my kids read it. And I loved it so much, I demanded they read it. And we all read the whole series, So, I mean,
Sweet.
It was, and then when I read it, I thought, what in the world are people so, crazed about. So,
Mhm.
everybody has their own standards of what their kids should and shouldn't read that they think. And I think that is totally fine. But when you get into book banning, you're getting into dangerous territory, I think.
Yeah, it doubled last year, according to the ALA, the American Library Association. They tracked 1,269 attempts to ban books in libraries and school, the highest number of complaints since they began studying this 20 years ago. But most of those books, the vast majority, were books either by or about LGBTQ people. This book clearly is not. I don't get it.
Yeah, it's strange.
I live by one simple rule in life. Did the Nazis do it? If they did, don't do it.
The
Nazis loved banning books. So let's not do that.
Did they go after James Patterson? What? No.
Yeah. Also, like, technically, did he write these books, or were they ghost written by him, by his cadre of people? So
that's a whole other controversy.
Is it those authors who are being banned, really? So anyway,
Yeah,
I want to make sure they
knows?
get credit.
Yeah, that's
they
not
get
the
credit for
point.
getting people angry.
Do you
So-
think, does anyone, Rene, do you know, is there even a gay character in these books? Because
I did not
so.
even read these books.
Oh,
They
okay.
seem so fine for my, I remember them, and I remember I bought them for my son because I thought that would get him interested in reading, and he liked it okay. And then my daughter stole them, and she loved him more than my son. So that's what I remember about him.
You're a good mother. See, this is how our experiences contrast. I got the first Harry Potter book because I had read about all the buzz going on overseas, and I was reading to Harry and Alice at bedtime. And after about 60 or 70 pages of that, I thought, I just can't stand this anymore. We're going to read something else, kids. But Alice was so outraged, she learned to read just so she could finish that Sorcerer's Stone book. So it turned out well.
That's great.
And
Oh
shows
my gosh. That's great.
how little I understand what the public's going to like. All right, news story number 2. This one's also a follow-up. Anybody remember the publishing executive who allegedly stole manuscripts? That was Filippo Bernardini, a former publishing employee, and now he has pled guilty in a fraud case. He was accused of stealing, get this, more than 1,000 manuscripts, authors' manuscripts. He's going to avoid prison. He's made a deal. He's going to pay $88,000 in restitution to Penguin Random House, the largest publisher in the English-speaking world. Oh, thank goodness! I bet they were.
They really needed that money.
Yeah, and he's going to be deported. But for 5 years, he was impersonating publishing professionals to get these manuscripts. He'd pretend to be a particular editor, and then he'd email all of that editor's authors asking for their latest drafts, and got a whole lot of them. But the thing is, you can't really monetize that in any way that I know. You're not going to sell stolen manuscripts, even if there was a market. He says he stole them just because he wanted to read them. He's like a collector or something, or a book lover who gets pleasure out of reading the newest whatever. So, Jesse, I'm turning to you, and I could be wrong, but I'm seeing this guy as, I'm not saying he should have done this, but somebody who just totally loves books and collects manuscripts. And I think you collect a few things too, don't you?
I do. Yeah, this is one of those like crimes where no one's hurt. And yes, he shouldn't have done it. On the other hand, it shouldn't have been so easy to do, right? Like, he should have been like in the movie Sneakers, like he should get hired out to find the loopholes in security in publishing houses,
to
right?
catch a thief, huh?
Yeah, right. Is it very? Yeah. Are people not verifying emails? Like, it's one of the first things in IT security you teach somebody is to look at the actual email address that you're receiving the email from, not what it says, where it's from. Right?
But he did it straight to the authors, right?
Right.
Yeah. So
he might have gotten the pleasure of saying to himself, "Oh, look how the manuscript changed from draft 3 to what was published in the book." But it's not like you can write a dissertation about it. So,
These are like the people who get in trouble for like leaking like studio recordings from bands that the bands don't want it released, and then it gets released and they get mad about it because like these people just want to hear the music and want to spread that music and don't ask any money for it and just put it on the internet. And I'm always like, yes, artists and whatnot, but like he didn't seem to be harming anybody.
No.
And he just seemed to enjoy, I guess, seeing how stories changed over time. So
I guess so.
But
All right, news story number 3, also an update because we've talked a lot about this interest in artificial intelligence that has spiked recently because we're hearing about ChatGPT and other programs that can generate pictures and even more frightening words that they can be basically given a writing assignment and complete it, if not as well as Rene would do, but, competent. Not a jumble, not like monkeys typing at a typewriter randomly. So I could have chosen any of 10 stories that have gone down in the past week about AI, but the one that made me open my eyes the widest was that the WGA, that's the Writers Guild of America, wants artificial intelligence to be allowed to write screenplays. You might have thought they'd be wanting to ban it because it competes, but no. The WGA position, their proposal is to allow AI to write scripts as long as it doesn't impact writers' credentials or, of course, their payments. They're not at all proposing an outright ban on using AI. I think the proposal, as I read it, the idea is that a writer can use ChatGPT if that helps get you a first draft or whatever, and you don't have to share writing credit with whoever developed the software or their studios, or a studio executive could hand a writer an AI generated script and say, well, here's what it's supposed to be about, go make it good, or something like that. Rene, I'm going to you because you are an experienced screenplay writer and far more likely to see. Well, I just mean in the sense that I'm probably not going to be writing any screenplays. So I'm going to you on this WGA business. What do you think of this?
I think it's outrageous. And I also think that they're very naive to think that this is going to go well.
Yeah.
And I think it will impact jobs. And I also have read the transcript of Sydney from Microsoft Bing, and I'm telling you, Sydney will hunt you down and take credit and ruin the world. So I think this is a bad idea. I think it was done probably because they are anticipating some issues on credit and that sort of thing. They're trying to get ahead of the game on this.
Yeah.
But I think they should have just I think the wording should have been more pro writer, if that makes sense, rather than let's use this thing and the writer gets credit.
Maybe they've already been using it. Who knows? No, maybe they're trying to get ahead of when the story breaks and tells us that the first draft of Everything Everywhere All at Once was written by a computer program, and those two guys
they're trying to get ahead of it. Yeah,
this is not true, guys. I'm just speculating here, and so.
But it has. I mean, I'm certain at least a draft or so. Something. There's something that prompted this, and but it was disappointing to read. I think for me.
Yeah, their argument was it's just a tool. It's no different from Final Draft, which most people are using to write screenplays. That's a software program that just formats it, basically.
It just formats. It's like Word for screenplays. It's not even the same.
Yeah, or a pencil, which, nobody uses a pencil anymore either, right? A laptop. Point being that it's a tool, but not a writer. Except, of course, it does generate words, so I don't know if I buy that one.
It generates creativity. So it's not. I think they could even say it's like a dictionary. It's not. It generates a creative piece that you then take credit for yourself.
Right. All right. One last news story following up on much talk on this podcast about TikTok or the book division, which is called Book Talk. the stars like Colleen Hoover who have been made on TikTok. Well, if you paid any attention to the news recently, you probably know that a major TikTok executive testified before Congress where he did not appear at all to alleviate anybody's security concerns about this app. The Biden administration is now suggesting that it's going to ban TikTok if it's not sold to a U.S. company, which obviously the owner doesn't particularly want to do. I mean, I'm not sure why the country is threatened if China knows that I like to look at videos about ice cream or whatever, but I do know that Book Talk is selling a whole lot of books and has been since at least 2020, if not before. In 2021, TikTok was responsible for doubling the sales of many featured authors, and that's continuing. According to Vox, authors favored on Book Talk have seen sales increase by 43% in 2023 so far. Yes, I meant to say 2023, meaning that basically in the first 3 months, they've seen a 43% increase because of TikTok. A person at Bookscan, Kristen McLean, in that article in Vox said, quote, "When I look at the data, there's no other area of the U.S. publishing market that we can pin that's seeing the level of year-over-year growth right now. That's the third year of growth for these authors from TikTok." And I should say it's not just authors, they're influencers, just as they are in every other category. Some of those book influencers, you're watching their videos, they may be getting money for showing those books. At least one influencer, according to the article, is getting about $2,000 per video to hold up and say something about people's books. Jesse, I'm going to you in part because you're our social media expert, in part because Rene has such a disgusted expression on her face about this whole business that I'm almost afraid to go there, but I will if you want to.
We'll go to Jesse.
Okay.
All right.
Does the book community need what?
I have a couple thoughts about this.
Okay,
so
go.
one thing that annoys me is like banning TikTok doesn't fix the problem that the U.S., unlike every other Western country, does not have a set policy for our privacy concerns on the internet.
Right.
The information TikTok gets is nothing in comparison to the information that we are allowed where we are not given a choice to give to Facebook, Twitter,
Right.
our cable company,
Voluntarily.
Roku, etc. So banning TikTok doesn't solve that problem. So it annoys me when our government wastes time on not the problem. And second of all, TikTok is so popular because it's not one of the other ones. I don't think if TikTok got banned, it would end this new experience because all of the other social media companies have added TikTok-like features. Like, I don't know about you. I see a lot of TikTok videos on Facebook and on YouTube.
Yeah.
So I feel like people's creativity would just shift back to what already existed. But it's so
But it
weird.
wouldn't be owned by a Chinese company. That's the problem, right?
I mean, listen, almost all companies have money from Chinese corporations in them. Have anyone seen a movie recently?
I bet my iPhone was
yeah,
made there.
right?
What do you think?
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, I don't know where the Google Pixel is made, but I'm assuming it's not here. So, yeah, it's silly, and I don't know what will come of it. It would be sad if this like very wonderful, sweet community of people who love talking about books has to learn how to use another tool. But
Or start their own.
Yeah.
Call it Book Talk.
honestly, like something new might grow out of this, but it's annoying that they're focusing on the wrong issue.
I mean,
which is,
people
like,
have
where
started
our issue is.
other apps relating to books. They do it all the time, but they haven't really caught on.
Yeah.
And if I had to explain why TikTok, instead of the probably 40 other apps that launched that week, took off, I couldn't. But for whatever reason, it did.
Yeah.
And now it's it's not up there anymore. But in Plot Counterplot, the novel I wrote last year, there's a scene where law enforcement's trying to track something down and somebody down, and the character says, "Are you going to conduct surveillance?" And the reply is, today people surveil themselves, and he goes to their Facebook page and finds out everything he needs to know about them. And it does seem to me that I don't get what there is you could get from TikTok that isn't already readily available on those same people's Facebook and Instagram pages. But
yeah. So don't make it about information being given away. Like, our information is given away all the time. So.
Right. All right. We should probably move along. Alisa Lynn Valdes is an award-winning print and broadcast journalist and a former staff writer for both the LA Times and the Boston Globe. She's got more than 1 million books in print in 11 different languages. She was included on Time Magazine's list of the 25 most influential Hispanics, and she was a Latina Woman of the Year, as well as an Entertainment Weekly breakout literary star. She is the author of many books, including the aforementioned breakout book, The Dirty Girls Social Club. But now she is back with a new book, a suspense novel, launching a new series. The book's called Hollow Beast. So, Jesse, cue up that music and bring on our guest. Alisa, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Appreciate being here.
Okay, traditional first question. If you could give writers one piece of advice, what would it be?
That's hard.
Or two.
Well, I think, okay, so first I would say write the kinds of books you like to read, which I think sometimes, especially if you're being trained by an MFA program or something, and you're secretly reading commercial fiction, but you want to impress everybody by writing this other thing, don't do that. Like, just proudly like what you like, and you'll have, I think, a lot more luck that way than trying to write what you would want to read rather than what you think someone wants you to write.
Yeah, a book will turn out a lot better that way, I think, don't you?
I think so.
Let's turn the clock back a little bit. Back before you got into all this fiction writing, you were a journalist, right?
I was. Yeah.
So talk to us about that. What kind of things did you do?
I was a staff writer for both the Boston Globe and the LA Times for a total of about 9 years, a little more than 9 years. So it was kind of weird. I got my start at the Globe, hired right out of grad school as a long-form literary feature writer, which is a job usually you have to work up to that. But somehow, during grad school, I kind of became known as a literary writer, which is no surprise. I ended up being a novelist, but I like words. I like playing with words. And I went right into that job in the living arts section at the Globe, which I loved. But I also started to feel after a couple of years, like, when openings would come up in a foreign bureau or something, I'd want to apply, but there was always this sense of, well, you've never covered news. You've always been here writing these 3-page broad, sheet treatises on God knows what. So I asked to go and cover city government for a while. So I covered the city of Somerville, Massachusetts government. I did overnights for the news beat, just to kind of get a feel for that. Covered philanthropy for a while, did some music reviews. And then I moved to the LA Times. My undergrad degree is in music. I'm a saxophonist. I went to Berklee College of Music. So when I saw that the LA Times had an opening for a pop music writer, which is not a critic, I was covering the industry of pop music, I applied for that and went to do that for a while, which was really fun.
I'll bet.
Yeah.
Well, this explains a lot to me, because I went to your website and I was like just poking around, just doing my research, got onto your blog. An hour later, an hour has gone by, and I just went down the rabbit hole of all this great writing on your blog. Thoroughly enjoyed it. But it shows you have an amazing, creative, curious mind, which I love. So tell us how you got into fiction.
Thank you. That's so nice.
She's like that.
Well, I mean it. It was really, really good and fun reading.
That makes me feel great. Thank you. I wrote my first fiction story at the age of 9. I've always liked writing. I've always liked music. I became a journalist because I wanted to be paid to write, kind of. And I felt like that would be an easier way to do this thing that I loved for some reason. But I did, I started writing novels in high school, not very good ones. But my first time I wrote that I wanted to write the great American novel, and I used that phrase, like an idiot. I was probably 15, in a journal. And so I always toyed with it, but I was always afraid to send stuff out until I was expecting my son, who's almost 22 now. And I was working at the LA Times, and I lived in Orange County, and it was like more than an hour drive to downtown LA and back. So it was, 2+ hours in traffic with morning sickness, and when you get in those SIG alert traffic jams in LA, you can't get out of them. So I'm like, I have to throw up. I took Ziploc baggies with me in the car in case I had to throw up on the way to work. And then you get to this building in California, they have to tell you if your building has toxic substances that could harm a fetus. So I'd get to this building at work, and there's this plaque outside, like, if coming in this building is going to harm your baby, So, a couple months into that, just breathing in all the smog and the stress, I was like, you know what? I'm going to sell my house. I'm going to cash out my 401k. I'm going to move back to New Mexico, and I'm going to write my novel before this kid gets here. Because if I don't do it now, once he's here, I'm stuck in this life.
Wow.
And it was a huge risk. I mean,
everybody
was like, you're an idiot. You're almost 3 months pregnant. You're quitting your job. You're making your husband quit his job. He did. He was an editor for a magazine out there. We both quit and moved to New Mexico, moved in with my dad again. He has a big house, but it was just a really big gamble that most people thought was absolutely stupid. But it was hard. I mean, I won't say it wasn't hard. We ran out of money for a while. I had to take my son was born, and while he was an infant, I had to take a job as, I say had to, it was a fine job, but I was the arts editor of the Albuquerque Tribune briefly while I finally finished my first novel. And I turned it in to my agent on a Friday, and by Monday we had 3 offers. And by the following Wednesday, it had gone to a 6 publisher bidding war.
Wow, sweet.
Wow.
Yeah. And then that book debuted on the New York Times bestseller list, and spent 21 weeks there. And I quit my day job, and that was that.
Well, that's the way it's supposed to work. Congratulations. So that book you're talking about is The Dirty Girls Social Club, right?
Yeah.
And that was a huge hit, like you were saying.
Long time ago.
And you've talked about how it was received and perhaps discussed as being sort of a Latina Terry McMillan novel. What does that mean? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I was pretty methodical as a reporter when I was looking to make the leap from journalism to fiction. I didn't just say, I'm going to quit and do this. I don't know what I'm doing. I was like, let me be a reporter, find out what the industry is looking for, so that I could have the best shot at actually succeeding. Some people would say that's selling out. I don't see it that way. As a journalist too, you're given an assignment. You're going to write about this topic. You have this much space to do it. And I like having those parameters, but I think that within that structure, you can be as creative as you possibly can. So that's kind of how I viewed it. And I knew that from a couple of agents I talked to, that publishing at the time, New York Publishing, was looking for, in their words, a Latina Terry McMillan. And what they meant by that was Terry McMillan is an African-American woman author who was the first. Waiting to Exhale, how Stella got her groove back. She was the first one to come along that publishing published, writing about just regular everyday life as a middle-class, college-educated Black women in the United States. And it wasn't about slavery, and it wasn't about poverty, and it wasn't about, there were struggles, but they were universal struggles. And now we know, we kind of call that, The other books, you know, people like Alice Walker, Toni Morrison, those are great books. But they were books that by and large were about suffering and struggle and how hard it has been to be a Black person or Black woman. And Terry McMillan was like, that's all good, but there's also joy here. There's also just life here. There's also universal humanity here. And when you tell just one story of a certain group of people, it's actually, even if you think you're being benevolent by feeling sorry for them because of that story, it's very limiting in the kind of humanity of that group.
Sure.
You know, the dominant class should not be the only group of people that gets to be the default person, really. So that's what they meant. So, and I was happy to do that, but I also knew that what they were looking for didn't exist, because Hispanic or Latino as a, you know, group is a Census Bureau invention of the United States. And not that, I mean, all identity is a social construct, right? But because by virtue of, you know, the horrors of slavery, African Americans, who are the most genetically diverse group of Americans, had lost all their language and cultural and national ties because it was taken from them. You can't speak your language anymore. They don't necessarily know. With Latinos, it was different. So you've got people from 24 different nations, and each of those nations has its own caste systems of ethnicity and race and social class and everything else. And suddenly all those people are being thrown together and simplified in the US as one thing. So I knew publishing kind of bought into, it's a monolithic group at that time. And I knew that wasn't true. I knew that wasn't true from my own background in my family. My mom and dad both would be considered Latino, Hispanic, whatever you want to call it, but they're so different. Their backgrounds could not be more different. So I thought about it, again, being kind of strategic. How can I give publishing what they think they want that doesn't exist? And by the end of the book, they'll realize that the thing they thought they wanted didn't exist, and that also that book will accomplish what they want in a way that, because you had, you know, Sandra Cisneros, Julia Alvarez, and they were writing about very specific, like Julia Alvarez was writing about a Dominican American experience. Sandra Cisneros was writing about one facet of a Mexican American experience. And to reach the whole country, I knew that you would have to capture several of those groups and also have them interacting with each other to show the conflicts between some of the groups, the differences among the groups, but also that they were all unified. So I created 6 lead characters. I broke it down by census. So 2 of them are Mexican American, but one thinks she's Aztec, the other thinks she's a Spaniard, and did all of that. And then, so that was one level of it, but the other level was the universal stuff. So they're all just college educated, professional friends in Boston dealing with romance problems or whatever. And I didn't know if it would work, and it did. So
yeah, I'd say it did big time.
Yeah.
So you had a huge success, and then you followed it up with several other novels. Would it be fair to say in the same vein or a similar vein?
Yes. Actually, so St. Martin's Press had the first right of refusal over my second novel.
Right.
Which was, okay, so I wrote a book about an Irish-American female jazz saxophone student at Berklee College of Music. My mom is half Irish. And it was based on my own life studying jazz at Berklee. And she meets her mentor in The Last Living Legend of Bebop, who's this old man. And it's a jazz story, you know,
right.
About music. And I turned it in. I was very naive. Like, I felt like I did the thing that they wanted. Now I get to write whatever I want because I have readers and followers.
Sorry,
and
I shouldn't laugh so loudly, but go ahead.
I was really naive. So I turned it in, and I remember my editor saying, "This is a beautiful book. It's very literary. It's one of the most beautiful books I've ever read, but it's not in your brand."
Right.
And I
One
remember
book, and you already had a brand, huh?
I had a brand, and to be told that basically the most autobiographical thing I'd ever written was not in my brand was really interesting to me. Like, that I had sought to write really a parody of what they wanted, which was, we are not a monolith. You could be anybody and have this label put on you. And then suddenly I become the queen of this label that I'm trying to say doesn't really even exist in the way you think it does. And that's all I can write about now.
Right.
So that was really eye-opening. This 20-year journey in publishing and TV and film to some extent has been really educational for me. I made a lot of missteps.
Haven't we all?
Yeah.
So then you took about 10 years off and didn't write or didn't publish at any rate for about a decade, right?
Yeah. I mean, I did have a dozen books out. So I did a couple of YA books and a memoir and a handful of novels. But each time the sales kind of got less and less and the publicity was less and less. And not that the sales were bad, like by book 3 or 4, they were still pretty good, but they're not like the first one. So I started to feel like publishing was looking at me like I was the prom queen who'd grown up to work in the lunchroom at the school. Like now I'm the lunch lady and everyone's like, she used to be so full of promise and pretty. Great, no gravy, thanks. I can't look at you. That was me. And I was still writing. I'm a compulsive writer. I write because I like writing, but nothing that I wrote. It was a weird phase. It was kind of like you're still close enough to Dirty Girl Social Club that we really need you to do that. But I kept trying to do that, and I knew that I put my heart and soul into those books, but they were also somewhat disingenuous because I was not being allowed to write what I wanted to write.
Sure.
Whereas somebody like T.C. Boyle gets to do that. T.C. Boyle can write Tortilla Curtain about, Mexican Americans living in Malibu Canyon. And no one's like, that's not in your brand. You're not that kind of person. Like, what do you mean? I'm a white guy. I can write about anybody. I can't do that. It's somehow inauthentic if I do that. So that was frustrating. But I took time off to try to learn to write a screenplay too, because Dirty Girls has been developed several times for TV and film, and it hit a bunch of obstacles that we don't need to get into. But one of those was a lack of a Latina screenwriter who could adapt my work. So I took time off to study that. I homeschooled my son. I worked a bunch of different jobs. I was a school teacher and I was an education policy analyst for the state of New Mexico. I just did stuff.
Stay busy.
Yeah, I wanted to do journalism, but I was stranded in New Mexico by divorce and shared custody, where you can't take your kid out of state without dad's permission. And I wouldn't have done that anyway. And there's 2 journalism jobs in New Mexico, and they never even call me back, which was really weird. I didn't quite understand it. I did call one guy once. I'm like, how come I've applied for several jobs and you guys don't call me back? And they said, because I was overqualified, which is either you're actually overqualified or you're old. It was one of those. Or there's
can't say that. So.
Can't say that.
Yeah.
It's like you got too much experience and should be dead. So
That's much better. Yes.
Yes, it's much better. So that, I did what I had to do.
Right.
But sorry.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say the blessing in that for me was enough time passed that I thought now there's no real success. Like there's a whole generation of people who grew up and they have no idea who I am. They've never heard of me in publishing. Like I can write whatever I want now. Yeah. Enough time has passed. And what I wanted to write was Hollow Beasts. And
well, let's talk about that because it's a mystery basically, right? Which is a far cry from where you started out. How did you come to mystery novels?
This one's actually straight suspense.
Okay.
But
suspense novel, crime novel.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. That's always been where my heart is. In college, I got into Dean Koontz, and you can see my whole bookshelf is basically Dean Koontz.
Okay. We had Dean on the podcast 3 or 4 months ago. I'll send him a copy of this.
Oh my God. No, you don't understand. I'm such a scary, creepy fangirl. Please don't be scared of me.
Okay, I won't then.
No, you can. I'm not really. I'm just a huge fan. I have 2 writers that I go back to over and over again for inspiration, and it's him and Charles Dickens.
We have not had him on the podcast.
No, we haven't. He won't call us back.
Yeah. He's so rude. God.
But there must be something you like about suspense novels than crime novels. What is that?
plot.
That's a far cry from, 6 college girls having romantic problems and whatnot.
Maybe. I don't think so.
No?
Yeah, I mean, I think
Okay.
and I do think, well, it's plot driven. So yeah, the other stuff is more character driven. And I like writing character stuff. And those books were definitely what I wanted to read and couldn't find in my late 20s, early 30s, maybe. But I like suspense. I just like a driving plot. I like sitting down with a book and you just the mastery of planning out a plot where someone has to keep reading. And just, you cannot put it down. And if you do put it down, you're thinking about it all the time and you have to know what happened. That feels like an interesting life, right? I want my life to feel like that I'm really engaged in it. And I want to know what's going to happen next. And I'm excited by the moment that I'm in. There's something kind of Buddhist about suspense in a way. Like, I don't know. It's like you're really in the moment with those books.
Right.
You lose
urgent.
yourself. Yeah.
Right. I think sometimes more, literary fiction or some other, there's not as much pacing demand, but when you're in the world of popular fiction, the pace cannot sag, right? It's got to be urgent.
Yeah. And I look back over those first books and they're not necessarily literary. I don't read a lot of literary fiction. I like fiction where writers get out of the way. I think that's probably the journalist in me.
Yes.
Reading William Zinser's On Writing Well in grad school changed my life. It's this little thin book, but Zinser, I love that book. And the most important thing in it has just become my motto for writing, and which is never use a big word if a small word will do.
Yep.
Good advice for writing any kind of fiction, I'd say. Okay, so you've got a mystery novel now, and it appears pretty clear you're trying to create a series character, like someone who could repeat, right? Was that deliberate, or did that just evolve when you were writing?
It's deliberate. It is a 2-book deal, so I'm right now in the last round of edits for book 2 called Blood Mountain. It comes out next year.
Yeah, sorry, it's already scheduled. It's up on Amazon.
I know. I saw that. I'm like, I better actually finish this because people are ordering it.
Because they got a cool cover, so.
They do. I like the whole cover theme for these, which is an animal face. And so, yeah, the limited experience I had, I was hired as a TV writer for a show that never got made, but I learned a skill there that I've used for this, which is you sit down and you write a series arc for each character, which is like the overarching plot for the entire life of the series. And then underneath that, you outline each season. And then within each season, you outline each episode. So I kind of had that template in mind. I know where Jodie starts and where I'd like her to end. I don't know if the series will last that long, but in my mind, she's somebody I would like to live with for a long time. She feels like the most genuine and relatable character for me.
Tell us about her, because she is very unique. She's a poet, right? And an academic and a game warden, rookie of all things, which is terrifying, I think, in and of itself. So tell us about her.
I wanted to write about a game warden. I have a friend who's a game warden, and we had dinner and he was telling me about his job. And this was a few years back, but it planted the seed. He told me game wardens are it's the most dangerous law enforcement job in America. I didn't believe him because I thought you're out in the middle of nowhere, but it is. They're by themselves. Their territory is like 5,000 square miles. They don't have a radio or cell service, and they're up against poachers. So it is very dangerous. And that was intriguing. So I had that playing in my mind for a while. And then during the early days of the pandemic, I was doing a lot of hiking. I moved out of the city to get away from people, and just being in nature, like in the mountains. I just started thinking if I could do it all over again, and if I were younger, I would want to have a job where I'm out here all the time. Like this just feels more like real than being in a city and being at a desk, and also helping animals. While game wardens are the only cops whose job is to protect animals from people.
Mm.
You're not
That's
protecting
fascinating.
people, really. Yeah. And I thought at a time when there's this anti-cop sentiment, this is the only kind of cop we need more of, in my opinion, because we're really, in New Mexico, they give out like 40,000 deer licenses, tags to kill deer every year. But more than that, 46,000 are poached. And it's a problem. Poaching's a huge problem. And so I just liked all of that. So how do I get around being someone who's been at a desk job and a journalist and a mom and, policy wonk and all this stuff and write about being a cop? I thought, well, let's have her have done what I did, sort of. She's a poet, a little bit different, and be new at it. Because I like the idea too of, like
she got someplace to go now in the
and
future.
she can screw up and it makes sense. It won't be like that writer doesn't know anything about this world. We already know my character knows nothing about what she's doing. I'm learning with her. And I also like the idea of a middle-aged character who's changing careers.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Because that's kind of a thing now. The economy, everything's changing all the time. And we don't think about people in midlife having to reinvent themselves, but that's something I had to figure out how to do here in New Mexico, when I couldn't find work or, so I wanted that, like what that feels like to be kind of in your late 40s with a bunch of people in their 20s, who are all starting out together. So she's the oldest rookie game warden ever hired by the state. Like,
I love that. I love it. Yes, that's amazing. Thanks. Well, okay. So for our writers here, tell us what your writing day looks like, because we all want to know those things.
Yeah. I'm pretty disciplined with writing. I look at it as a job. I don't think of it as terribly precious. I think that's the journalism background. Like, as a journalist, you don't get the luxury of waking up and saying, I don't really feel like listening to Police Scanner today. I don't have my favorite coffee and my feathered boa or whatever I need, like the magic. You just get up and you do it. And if you have a headache, you still do it. And if you don't want to write, you write anyway. And that's when I found some of my best writing happened, is when I least felt like it. So I try to continue that. I'm a morning person. So I'm up around 7. I will walk my dog. I'll have coffee and check emails, social media. And then I will sit down and write for 5 or 6 hours.
That's awesome.
Every day. Also, I'm an auditory learner. Some people are visual learners and kinesthetic learners or whatever. So my editing process, I'll write for maybe 4 hours, 5 hours, and then I will spend the last hour reading what I wrote into a digital recorder.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And then I'll go hiking usually in the afternoons and I'll listen to it. So the last part of my writing day is listening to what I wrote while I'm moving my body, because I feel like my brain works better. It's almost like a meditative state when I'm hiking and I have headphones on and I can listen to the writing. It just, for me, I can hear if it's repetitive more than I can see if it's repetitive.
I don't think we've ever had on this show somebody that does that. That is really interesting and a really great point about auditory learners as well, because I think most people assume if you're a writer that you aren't an auditory learner. So I love that. And I hope people will learn what they are, first of all. That's really important. And then maybe take up what you're doing, because that's fascinating. So, okay, keep us on the fascinating train, as I guess we have to wind down soon, but I don't want to. But are you an outliner? I'm assuming yes, because of what we've talked about. So how far down the scale are you on outlining, on the scale from 1 to 10, I guess?
If 1 is not outlining at all and 10 is very rigid, I'm probably a 9.
Okay.
Yeah. And even character sketches, like I will create these characters on a yellow legal pad. I'll fill a legal pad with just details about that person before I even sit down to write the plot outline. I need to know very clearly who these people are, what their personality type is, what happened to them, who hurt them, how they interact with the people in their lives. I'll like cover my walls with, pictures of people I think look like them, or I'll go on Zillow and just print out pictures of houses that look like where they live. I think that's the journalist in me. I feel almost guilty if it's not based in something real. But it's also
interesting.
It's also helpful for the consistency,
Sure.
of it. So I'm pretty regimented about that. Yeah. I don't think I know Dean Koontz doesn't. I heard him saying he doesn't outline. But I think when you've written as many books as he has, you can kind of
May not have to anymore.
Right.
Or it could be just saying that. Who knows? We'll never know with fiction writers. They make stuff up all the time.
Professional liars.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you've got Blood Mountain coming out in 2024, sequel to Hollow Beast. So does that make you happy? Or are you thinking, yes, I know how I'm paying the mortgage next year? Or does it just make you think, oh my gosh, I've got a deadline?
I'll tell you, it's the first book I already had a contract for before I sat down to write it.
Right.
And that experience is a lot more anxiety provoking. For a couple of reasons, because you've given your editor an idea of what the book is about. But even with all the outlining I do, books often will take their own direction once you start writing them.
Right.
That's different than you initially thought. So there's been kind of a little bit of that where the book and the characters went somewhere else and the editors are kind of like, hang on a second, so I've had to rewrite that book more. I think it's almost better to go out with a completed book, because then your editors are like, oh, they're seeing it with fresh eyes rather than having an expectation about it. It's that saying, like, what is the Zen saying? He who has no expectations will never be disappointed. If your publisher's already expecting something, and I'm not saying they're disappointed. She actually read it and she said, I think I like this more than Hollow Beasts, which I didn't think was possible. So that was nice. I'm just really hard on myself. Like if there are any notes at all, I'm like, oh. But yeah, it's been a different kind of stress. But not a bad one. I mean, like you said, it's nice to know you're going to get paid.
It's like cholesterol. There's good and bad, right? There's good stress and bad. So we got to wrap this up. But what's next from you? Is it going to be Jody Luna 3, or what are you working on after Blood Mountain?
I have started writing a standalone suspense novel.
Which will not be what your publisher wants at this point, right?
It might be. My agent thinks it might be. Okay. I mean, I don't know if they're gonna want more Jody Luna books. I hope they do. I think a lot depends. They're not gonna know until they see how the sales do.
Well, I should point out that as we record this, the book has just been released. So
right, just been released. It has been optioned for a TV series as of last week.
I'll watch.
Wow.
Which doesn't mean it's going to be a TV series, but hopefully we'll be able to announce that soon. And if that actually happens, I think the chances that I get more books will be better.
Yes.
So we'll see. But yeah, I'm going to stick with suspense, whether it's this series or standalone books.
Cool. Alisa, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It was really fun. Great questions.
What a fantastic interview. That was terrific. All right, a few parting words. We are still taking registrations, not for the cruise, but for the WriterCon's small group retreat, which will be in July, the 19th through the 23rd at Stonecastle Convention Center in Branson, Missouri. You've always thought about going to Branson, right? But you've never quite gotten around to doing it. And this is your chance for the Dolly Parton Stampede or whatever you want to do when you're not writing, because this is an intensive 5-day affair with feedback, specific to your manuscript, which I will have read and others will have read both before and during this retreat. Plus there's teaching and mentoring, and we usually manage to have some fun too. If that interests you, go to the WriterCon website and click up the toolbar where it says retreat. But just to the left of Retreat, I think you'll see Conference, because the main event, the WriterCon Conference, is coming up on us. That's September 1st through 4th, Labor Day weekend in Oklahoma City. I know last time I think we said we have more than 50 presenters lined up. Well, now it's over 60, and it's getting darn close to 70. This is, Rene, argue with me if you disagree, but I think this is the best roster. Don't argue with me about this, though.
No.
The best roster we have ever had, particularly of agents and publishers, which is hard to do in this environment, but we've done it. I'll tell you what I always tell Rene and everybody we work with is basically, I don't want any agents at WriterCon that I wouldn't be happy to have from my agent. So there are people that I know or have very strong recommendations about and can recommend them. It shouldn't just be random people. It should be the best. And that's what we're bringing to WriterCon. Plus, we're coming up with some new ways of improving the agent and publisher and pitching process, which I think are going to be are going to make some difference in the success rates people have pitching. And as if that weren't enough, we're adding a ReaderCon on Monday for the whole general public when they can come meet some of the authors. Okay, I've talked too long, but for more information on this, visit our website, writercon.com. And if you haven't joined the WriterCon Facebook group yet, please do it, and you'll get daily updates about what's going on in the writing world, all right? Until next time, keep writing, and remember, you cannot fail if you refuse to quit. I'll see you next time.